The little black girl hid beneath the broken loading ramp, asking the biker why her mom didn't return last night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a humid summer evening when a small figure appeared at the back of the truck yard, barely visible in the flickering light from the broken street lamp. A little black girl, no more than 8 years old, hid beneath a rickety old loading ramp, her tiny hands clutching the splintered wood. She trembled as if the night itself was closing in on her. Her clothes were torn, dirt smeared across her cheeks, and her eyes were wide with fear. She took a deep breath and peeked out from beneath the ramp, her heart racing as she looked for help. Her mind was filled with a single, desperate question. Where was her mother? The night had been long, and the silence around her felt heavy. It was then that she saw him, a man on a motorcycle, parked nearby with his back to her. His leather jacket shimmered in the dim light, and his motorcycle, a beast of chrome and steel, stood still in the parking lot. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then her fear overwhelmed her. She had no one else to turn to. She pulled herself from under the ramp, her bare feet scraping against the gravel, and stumbled towards him. Her voice broke the quiet as she approached, barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir, can you help me?" The man turned around, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of her, dirty, barefoot, and on the verge of tears. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The little girl's lip quivered, and she reached out a small, trembling hand to clutch his sleeve. "My mom, she didn't come back last night. I don't know where she went," she said, her voice barely audible. "She promised she'd be home by the time the sun went down, but she never came." The biker frowned, his heart sinking at the sight of the girl's fearful face. Hey, don't worry. We'll figure this out. Where did she go?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know. She was supposed to meet me here, but she never came." The man could tell there was more to the story than what the little girl was saying. He crouched down to her level, his expression softening. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Lena," she whispered, her voice still shaking. "My mom's name is Rita. We were supposed to meet at the diner, but she never showed up. I waited all night, and I'm scared." The man's heart ached for her. He looked around the empty lot, his mind working quickly. He could feel the weight of the promise he had to make. Without hesitation, he stood up, brushing the dirt from his pants. "Stay here. I'll be right back," he said, his voice firm but kind. As he walked to his bike, Lena's eyes followed him, her small face filled with both hope and fear. She couldn't understand why her mom wasn't back. Why had she promised to return and then disappeared? The biker started his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life, and Lena watched as he sped off into the night. Her heart pounded in her chest, wondering what would happen next. She wasn't sure where her mom was, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. The biker had promised to help, and for the first time in hours, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The biker roared down the darkened streets, his mind racing as the headlights of his motorcycle sliced through the night. The little girl's face was etched in his memory, her tear-streaked cheeks and desperate eyes pleading for help. He knew he couldn't waste any time. The promise he'd made to her father weighed heavily on his heart. A promise to protect, to shield the innocent. That was the code he and his brothers lived by, no matter the cost. He had ridden many roads in his life, some smooth, some full of danger, but nothing compared to the feeling of uncertainty gnawing at him now. He had to find her mother, no matter what. As he sped through the empty streets, he thought about the girl's words. She had mentioned a diner. He knew the place, the small, roadside diner that had been a staple in town for decades. It wasn't far. He had to get there fast. The engine growled beneath him as he shifted gears, pushing the bike to its limits. The wind whipped against his face, stinging his skin, but he barely noticed. His focus was on one thing, finding that woman. As he neared the diner, he saw the neon sign flickering in the distance, the soft glow casting an eerie light on the empty parking lot. He slowed down, his eyes scanning the area, looking for any sign of her. She had promised her daughter she would come back, and now she was gone. The bike came to a stop outside the diner. He parked it and dismounted, his boots hitting the gravel with a heavy thud. The silence was deafening. He walked up to the door, pushing it open with a creak. The familiar smell of grease and stale coffee hit him, but there was no warmth in it tonight. The diner was empty. The stools along the counter were vacant, and the jukebox in the corner played a lonely tune. He looked around, hoping to see someone, anyone, who could point him in the right direction. The waitress behind the counter glanced up, her tired eyes meeting his. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm looking for a woman. Her name's Rita. She was supposed to meet her daughter here last night," he said, his tone firm. The waitress frowned, her face showing the signs of too many sleepless nights. "Rita?" she repeated. "I don't know any Rita, but I do remember a woman coming in here yesterday evening. She looked real sick. She didn't stay long. I didn't think much of it, but now that you mention it, I think she was on her way out when I saw her last." The biker's heart sank. He felt a pit form in his stomach as he realized the truth. Rita hadn't just gone missing. Something had happened to her. He walked over to the counter, his mind racing with questions. "Where did she go?" he asked. The waitress shrugged. "I don't know. She left, walked out the door like. She was in a hurry. I didn't think much of it, like I said." He nodded, frustration building within him. He had to find her, and fast. He turned on his heel and walked back toward his motorcycle, the sound of his boots echoing in the empty diner. As he mounted the bike and started it up again, he glanced over at the parking lot, his eyes scanning for anything that could help. Then he saw it. A silver SUV parked at the far end of the lot, its engine still warm. His heart skipped a beat. That was the car. He could feel it. He kicked the stand up, revved the engine, and took off down the road, his mind set on one thing: getting to Rita before it was too late. He sped through the quiet streets, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had to catch up to that SUV. The road ahead of him stretched out like a challenge, and he wasn't about to back down. He pushed the bike harder, the engine growling beneath him, the wind biting at his face. The world around him blurred as he focused on the one goal that mattered: to find Rita, to keep his promise. As the lights of the city faded behind him, he knew he was getting closer. He could feel it. The chase was on. The roar of the engine echoed through the night as the biker's motorcycle raced down the winding roads, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. His grip tightened on the handlebars, his heart racing in time with the engine's growl. Every second mattered now. He could feel the heat of the pursuit, the weight of the promise to the little girl pressing heavily on his chest. Rita, her mother, had disappeared the night before, and now, with every twist and turn, the biker was getting closer to finding the truth. He glanced at the silver SUV ahead, its headlights briefly illuminating the road before it turned onto a side street. The pursuit was nearing its climax. He was almost there. The bike surged forward, its wheels gripping the asphalt with a powerful force as he followed the car, inching closer and closer. The streetlights flickered as he raced through intersections, narrowly dodging a few cars. He had to stay focused. The SUV was no longer just a vehicle. It was the key to unraveling everything. The man's thoughts flashed to the little girl, Lena, her wide, innocent eyes filled with fear, the trembling in her voice when she asked where her mother was. His stomach churned. What kind of man takes a mother away from her child like that? And why? The answer was somewhere ahead, waiting for him to find it. The road twisted, leading him into an industrial area on the outskirts of town. He could see the faint outline of the SUV up ahead, pulling into a rundown warehouse parking lot. The sound of the motorcycle grew louder as he closed the distance between them, the tires skimming over the cracked pavement. He slowed down, cutting the engine, and coasted silently toward the lot. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and uninviting. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, and the place felt as abandoned as it looked. He parked his bike just out of sight, hiding it behind a large, rusted dumpster. The area was eerily quiet. Only the distant hum of the city's nightlife could be heard. His pulse quickened as he dismounted and started walking cautiously toward the warehouse. The front door was slightly ajar, a faint sliver of light spilling from within. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever he might find. As he approached the entrance, he heard muffled voices, but he couldn't make out the words. He crouched down, staying low, and moved closer to the door. The voices became clearer as he neared. He could hear a man's voice, deep and commanding. "She's in there. Don't let her out." "Not yet." The biker's fists clenched. The pieces were falling into place. This was no random kidnapping. Whoever had taken Rita had done it with a plan, and it seemed they weren't ready to let her go. He pulled his phone from his pocket and quickly typed a message to the other bikers. "Get here fast. We need backup." Then, he turned his attention back to the door. His instincts screamed that this was a dangerous situation, but he had come too far to turn back now. He pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside. The dim light inside the warehouse revealed a scene that made his blood run cold. Rita was lying on the floor, bound and bruised, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "Hey!" Man stood over her, his back to the door. The biker's jaw tightened. He recognized the man. It was Officer Donovan, the very man who had been so quick to dismiss Lena's story. The same officer who had likely been responsible for Rita's suffering. The biker's mind raced. He could feel the anger building inside him, but he knew he had to stay calm. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about getting Rita out of here safely and protecting Lena. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward, his voice low but filled with authority. "You need to let her go," he said, his voice steady despite the fury burning inside him. Officer Donovan stiffened at the sound of the voice and turned slowly, his eyes widening in surprise. "What the hell do you want?" he spat, taking a step back. The biker took another step forward, his body tense, ready for whatever was about to happen. "I'm here to make sure she gets out of here. You won't hurt her anymore." Donovan's eyes flickered toward the door, as if weighing his options. The biker could see the man's fear, the fear that the walls were closing in. "This isn't your fight," Donovan sneered, his hand hovering near his belt. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The biker narrowed his eyes. "I know exactly who you are." With that, the tension in the room snapped. Donovan lunged for his weapon, but the biker was faster. In a swift motion, he disarmed the officer and shoved him back. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice cold. The officer's face twisted with rage as he struggled to get up, but the biker stood firm, making sure the man stayed on the ground. "You've got no power here," the biker said, glaring down at him. "You're finished." Just then, the sound of engines revving filled the air. The bikers were here. The backup had arrived. The officer's face drained of color as the sound of dozens of motorcycles filled the lot. The biker gave a small nod, signaling to his crew that it was time to move. "Get her out of here," he ordered, his eyes never leaving Donovan. As the bikers moved in to free Rita, the officer's defeated glare followed them. But it was too late. His time was up. The biker helped Rita to her feet, gently guiding her toward the door. She was weak, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Outside, the sound of engines roared as the bikers prepared to take her to safety. The battle was far from over, but they had won the first round. The promise had been kept. Rita would be safe, and Lena would get her mother back. The sun was just beginning to rise as the biker helped Rita into the back of the van, the headlights of the motorcycles cutting through the morning mist like a line of fire. The ride had been tense, every mile seeming to stretch longer than the last, but now, with the city's skyline on the horizon, Rita was safe for the moment. She was battered, bruised, and exhausted, but alive. And for that, the biker was thankful. But as the convoy of bikes continued to roll down the highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. Officer Donovan might be out of the picture for now, but he wasn't the only threat. The bikers had known from the start that this was going to be dangerous. And the more they uncovered about Rita's situation, the more the stakes rose. As the van pulled into the safety of a hidden garage on the outskirts of town, the biker looked over at Rita, who was now staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. She hadn't spoken much during the ride, and he couldn't blame her. After all, how could anyone find words after what she had been through? But now, as they parked, he knew they had to talk. The van came to a stop, and the door slid open. The biker stepped out and helped Rita out, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Rita nodded, her eyes finally meeting his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The biker gave her a small smile. "No need to thank me. Your family." Inside the garage, the rest of the crew had gathered. Storm, Crow, Phantom, and the others were already at work, preparing the next steps. The biker had made sure to send out a message to everyone who could help. He'd called in favors, mobilized the whole crew. No one was going to get away with this. We need to find out everything we can about Donovan, the biker, said, his voice low, but carrying authority. And whoever else is involved in this mess. Storm, the towering man who had been with the club for over 2 decades, nodded. We'll dig. We've got people in all the right places. Make sure no stone is left unturned, the biker added. We're not just looking for who did this to Rita. We're looking for anyone who had a hand in hurting Lena. The mention of Lena made Rita flinch slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. Is she okay? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. The biker nodded. She's with my sister for now. She's safe, Rita. She's not alone. Rita closed her eyes, her relief palpable. It was clear she was a mother at heart, her concern for her daughter outweighing everything else. Thank you, she whispered again, tears starting to well up. The biker placed a hand on her arm. We're going to make sure she's never in danger again. The air in the garage was tense, heavy with the weight of what they had just uncovered. But even more than that, it was filled with a sense of determination. The bikers were used to living life on the edge, but this was different. This wasn't just about keeping the peace or fighting back against the world. This was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The biker turned to the group. Get everything you can. We need to figure out who's pulling the strings. If Donovan is just a pawn, we need to know who the real players are. Crow, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I've got a contact in the legal system. I'll see what I can find out. Someone has to be making those decisions for Donovan. Good, the biker replied. Keep me posted. As the group split up to continue their investigation, the biker stood for a moment, taking in the scene. The sound of engines revving and phones buzzing filled the air, but in the midst of it all, the biker's mind kept returning to one thing. Rita and Lena. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about righting wrongs. It was about making sure that these innocent lives, would never again be caught in a system that was willing to destroy them. As he turned back to Rita, he saw the worry in her eyes. You're safe now, he repeated, his voice calm and firm. And we're not going anywhere until this is finished. Rita nodded, the weight of the world still heavy on her shoulders, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. I trust you, she said quietly. The biker nodded in return. We're family, and family doesn't let each other down. Just then, the sound of motorcycles roaring to life cut through the air again. The rest of the crew was ready. The biker took a deep breath, his mind focused. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a long while, he knew they were on the right path. This was far from over, but they had made a promise, and they weren't going to stop until it was kept. The biker's eyes were sharp, scanning the dimly lit room as the crew gathered around the table. The weight of the night hung in the air. They had uncovered a lot, but the deeper they dug, the darker the situation became. The mission to protect Rita and Lena was no longer just about getting them to safety. It was about exposing the system that had failed them. The biker stood at the head of the table, his hands braced on the wood, his mind racing. The investigation was moving fast, but so were their enemies. He turned to the group. We're getting close. Too close. His voice carried the weight of every decision they had made. We need to be careful. This is bigger than just Donovan. We're up against people with power, with connections. People who can make things disappear. Storm, the massive biker with a heart of steel, crossed his arms. We've got the names. We've got the connections. It's time to hit them where it hurts. The rest of the crew nodded in agreement, their eyes dark with resolve. The biker knew Storm was right. But the question remained, where did they go from here? The intel they had gathered was enough to know that the corruption ran deep. But getting solid proof wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take everything they had, and more. They had to move fast. Time was running out. Phantom, the biker said, turning to the quiet member of the crew, the one who always had his finger on the pulse of the town's secrets. What did you find? Phantom's eyes flickered up from the pile of papers in front of him. We traced some of Donovan's financials. He's been funneling money. Lots of it. And it's not just him. There are others involved. Who? The biker asked. Big players. People with deep pockets, Phantom said, his voice low. Lawyers, politicians, even a few business owners in town. They've been covering for Donovan, making sure he stays in control. The biker's jaw clenched. We need to bring them down. Not just Donovan. All of them. Phantom nodded. It's going to take more than just the crew. We'll need to get some outside help. The biker thought for a moment. Call in some favors. We can't do this alone. He turned to the rest of the crew. Get everything ready. We move at dawn. As the crew split up to prepare, the biker stood at the window, looking out at the darkened street. He could feel the weight of what was coming. He had made a promise to Lena, and he wasn't going to stop until it was kept. The stakes were high, but they had come too far to turn back. They couldn't afford to hesitate now. He glanced at Rita, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room. She had been through so much, and yet, despite everything, she was still holding on. He knew that this fight wasn't just for them. It was for all the people who had been hurt by the system, people who had no one else to turn to. And the bikers were going to make sure they didn't have to fight alone. We're almost there, the biker muttered under his breath. The door to the room opened, and one of the bikers entered. Everything's ready, the man said. We've got the backup we need. The biker nodded. Good. Let's move. As the crew gathered their gear and prepared to hit the road, the biker's thoughts drifted to Lena. She had been through hell, but she was strong. Stronger than anyone gave her credit for. And they were going to make sure she never had to face that kind of darkness again. The mission ahead wasn't just about taking down a corrupt cop or exposing a criminal network. It was about making sure Lena had a future where she could finally feel safe. The biker pushed open the door, the night air cool against his face. The engines of the motorcycles roared to life as the crew mounted their bikes, the sound reverberating in the quiet street. They were ready, and they weren't going to stop until they brought down the people who thought they could control everything. As they rode out, the biker glanced at the rest of the crew. This was more than just a ride. This was their fight, their mission, and they were going to win. The sun had barely risen when the bikers rolled into the industrial district, the roar of their engines breaking the quiet stillness of the morning. The crew was ready, their faces determined, their mission clear. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt cop or exposing a criminal syndicate anymore. It was about making sure that families like Lena's were safe, that the truth would be revealed, no matter how deep the lies had been buried. The biker in charge led the convoy, his eyes scanning the area as they approached a rundown building in the heart of the district. This was where their target was located, the headquarters of a criminal empire hidden behind the guise of a legitimate business. The biker's jaw tightened. This was where Donovan had been pulling the strings. This was where they would end it. As they parked their bikes outside, the rest of the crew dismounted, moving with purpose. The biker looked over at Rita, who had stayed close by the entire time. She looked tired but resolute. The journey they had started together was about to reach its climax. Stay here, the biker said to her, his voice soft but firm. Rita nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. I'll be fine. Just be careful. The biker gave her a reassuring smile before turning toward the rest of the crew. Let's move. The group entered the building, moving with precision. Every member of the crew knew their role, knew what had to be done. The biker led the charge, his steps echoing in the empty corridor as they moved deeper into the building. The tension in the air was thick, each man and woman in the crew silently preparing for what was to come. They knew they had the element of surprise on their side, but the danger was far from over. The biker's heart pounded as they reached the office. At the end of the hall, this was it, the room where the highest levels of the operation took place. He signaled to the crew, and they took their positions, ready to breach the door. The biker turned the handle slowly, pushing it open just enough to peek inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. There, standing at the head of the table, was Officer Donovan. But he wasn't alone. Several other men, dressed in business suits, were seated around him. The biker's eyes flicked to the documents spread across the table, files, blueprints, and notes that clearly detailed their illegal activities. It was all laid out in front of him. He had everything they needed to bring them down. It's time, the biker whispered to the crew. He pushed the door open wide, stepping into the room with confidence. The men inside froze at the sight of him. Donovan's eyes widened in recognition, and he quickly stood, his hand moving toward the drawer of his desk. You shouldn't have come here, Donovan growled, his voice low and threatening. This is bigger than you. The biker didn't flinch. You're done, Donovan. This ends now. The crew moved in, flanking the men at the table, their eyes cold and unyielding. The biker's gaze never left Donovan, his voice steady. You've been running this operation for too long, and we're here to put an end to it. Donovan's face twisted with anger, but he knew he was outnumbered. You think you can just waltz in here and take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with. The biker's jaw tightened. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And I'm not leaving here without you behind bars. One of the other men at the table stood up, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. We're not involved in this, he said quickly, his voice shaky. We're just business partners with Donovan. He's the one behind everything. The biker nodded, motioning for one of the crew members to take the man into custody. Get them all, he ordered. We're taking down this entire operation. As the crew moved in to arrest the men, the biker turned back to Donovan, his face cold. You had the chance to make it right. Now you'll pay the price for everything you've done. Donovan's eyes flickered with fear, but he said nothing as he was cuffed and led away. The biker stood in the center of the room, looking at the files on the table, the evidence that would bring them all down. He knew it wasn't over. There were still people out there. People who had supported Donovan, who had protected him. But this was a start. A major victory. As the crew wrapped up the operation, the biker looked over at Rita, who was standing just outside the door. She had been watching the entire thing unfold, her face filled with a mix of relief and awe. The biker walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's done, he said softly. It's finally over. Rita's eyes welled up with tears as she hugged him. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. The biker smiled, his heart light with the knowledge that they had done what they set out to do. They had protected Lena. They had brought the truth to light. And they had brought down the man who had hurt them all. As the crew made their way back to their bikes, ready to head home, the biker knew this was just one chapter in a much larger story. But for now, they had won. And that was enough. The morning after the operation, the air felt different, lighter. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the town, but it couldn't erase the weight of the last few days. The biker sat on his bike, parked just outside the garage where they had secured Rita and the rest of the crew. It was a rare moment of quiet. The adrenaline had worn off, and now, he could finally think clearly. But that didn't mean everything was done. The criminal syndicate they had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. There was still work to be done. He rubbed his eyes, tired from the sleepless night. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Storm. We got a problem. Storm's voice was grim. What happened? The biker asked, his mind immediately alert. The cops. Well, the good ones. They're looking into what happened last night. They're asking questions. They think Donovan didn't act alone, and they're starting to connect some dots. They're getting closer to the big players, and if they make the wrong move, it's going to blow up in our faces. The biker cursed under his breath. How close are they? Close enough to make us nervous. You know what this means, right? If we don't move fast, they'll start connecting our names to the operation. The biker's gaze hardened. We can't let that happen. Exactly, Storm said. We need to get ahead of this, now? We can't wait for the law to figure this out. We need to control the narrative. The biker nodded to himself, a plan already forming in his mind. I'll handle it. Get the crew ready. He hung up, staring out at the horizon. The plan had always been to expose the corruption, but now that the law was involved, they couldn't afford to be sloppy. They had to control the situation before the wrong people got involved. He stood up, walking toward the garage where the rest of the crew was waiting. They were all gathered around a table, their faces hard, focused. The biker's eyes swept across the room, taking in the determined looks of his brothers and sisters. They had been through hell together, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Listen up, the biker said, his voice steady, commanding attention. The cops are starting to piece things together. They're getting too close. We need to move fast and clean. Crow, the former lawyer who had joined the crew years ago, leaned forward. What's the plan? The biker glanced around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. We're going to hit the syndicate's remaining operations before they can connect us to any of it. We go in hard. We take everything down, and we get out clean. No mess, no loose ends. You think the cops will back off? Storm asked. They will, the biker replied, if we leave them no choice. We make sure we're the ones controlling the story. We take down every operation linked to this syndicate, make sure they're all on the run, and we tie up the loose ends before the cops can make their move. And what about the families? Phantom asked, his voice soft but serious. What do we do with them? We make sure they're safe, the biker said firmly. We don't leave anyone behind. We've protected Lena, and we're going to protect the rest of them too. He turned to Crow. We'll need your connections. Get us the intel we need. Crow nodded, already pulling out her phone. I've got a few people I can call. I'll get the details. We move fast, and we don't look back. The biker turned to the others. The rest of you, get the gear ready. We go in together. We take it all down. No mercy. The crew nodded, the resolve in their eyes matching his own. They knew what needed to be done. They had come this far, and now they had to finish the job. As the crew split up to prepare, the biker stood by the door, his eyes narrowing. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The enemies they were facing were powerful, connected. But the one thing they couldn't buy, the one thing they couldn't control, was loyalty. The loyalty of the people standing by his side. And as long as they had that, they would win. He mounted his bike and revved the engine. The sound was a powerful roar, filling the air. The crew was ready. The time had come. They were going to take down the syndicate once and for all. This time, they weren't just fighting for Rita or Lena. They were fighting for every person who had been crushed under the weight of corruption and injustice. And they weren't going to stop until it was over. The sun had barely risen when the crew gathered in the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The garage was quiet, save for the sound of the engines being prepped and the occasional rustling of gear. It was an eerie calm before the storm. The biker, still sharp and determined, stood by the entrance, his arms crossed as he surveyed the team. They had a mission. The clock was ticking. The weight of the last few days was beginning to settle on everyone's shoulders. There was no turning back now. The operation was set in motion. They had to take down the remaining pieces of the syndicate before it could regroup. They had the intel, they had the backup, and they were moving in. The biker turned to Storm, his right-hand man, who was busy adjusting his gear. We go in fast and clean. No mistakes, the biker said, his voice steady. Storm nodded. We're ready. We know the location. We know the players. The rest is just execution. The biker took a deep breath. We're not just taking down a few criminals. We're dismantling the entire operation. If we do this right, we take them all down. All the way to the top. He looked over at the others. Phantom, Crow, Diesel, and the rest of the crew were gearing up, all focused, all ready for what was to come. They knew what they were risking. They knew it could all go sideways in an instant. But they were a family, and that was the only thing that mattered. The biker moved to his bike, pulling on his gloves and making sure everything was in place. We've got one shot at this, he said to the group, his voice calm but firm. We hit them hard, take no prisoners. We get in, get what we need, and get out. That's the plan. As the crew mounted their bikes, the bikers' thoughts went back to Lena and Rita. They had fought for them. They had fought for something bigger than just themselves. And now, it was time to finish what they had started. The sound of engines roaring to life filled the air as they pulled out of the warehouse, the convoy of motorcycles moving as one, cutting through the empty streets like a force of nature. The adrenaline was rising with every mile they covered. The destination was clear. The warehouse at the edge of the city, where the remaining criminals were holed up, was just a few miles away. The closer they got, the more intense the air became. It was like a storm was coming, and the biker could feel it building. They were getting closer, and he could see it now, the building up ahead, the place that had been their target all along. The crew slowed down as they approached, careful to keep their movements quiet. They needed to catch them off guard. The biker held up his hand, signaling the crew to stop. They dismounted and began to form a plan. The building loomed in front of them, a dark and foreboding structure. The sound of a distant engine echoed through the quiet morning, the only sign of life nearby. The biker's heart raced. It was time. The crew moved like shadows, silent and precise. They worked together as a unit, covering every entrance, every window, every exit. The biker's mind raced through every detail of the plan. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The last thing they needed was for someone to get caught, or worse, to blow the whole operation. As the team surrounded the building, they waited for the signal. The biker's eyes locked on the door, his focus never wavering. Then, it came, the flash of a light from inside. It was time. The biker's voice cut through the stillness. Go. The crew moved in. They swept through the building with practiced efficiency, clearing each room, taking out anyone who posed a threat. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. The biker's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the main office. He could feel it now. This was the moment. They were close. But as they burst through the door, they were met with resistance. The remaining criminals, Those who had managed to escape earlier were there waiting for them. Guns drawn, ready to fight. The biker didn't hesitate. He moved forward, his hands steady, his voice calm. This ends now. The battle was intense, but it was brief. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing exactly what to do. Within minutes, the last of the criminals had been taken down, and the building was secure. The biker stood in the middle of the room, looking around at the crew. They had done it. They had taken down the entire operation. The air was thick with the aftermath. The biker's heart was still pounding, but there was a sense of relief, a sense of victory. They had protected Lena. They had protected Rita. And they had made sure that no one else would have to go through what they had. The biker turned to the crew, a small smile on his face. "It's done," he said. "We're finished." But as they made their way out of the building, the biker couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. There was still work to be done, still people to protect. But for now, they had won. And that was enough. The morning after the raid, the crew gathered in the quiet aftermath, the weight of their success settling over them. The biker leaned against his bike, staring out at the open road, his mind still racing. They had taken down the syndicate, but the battle wasn't over. They had won this round, but there was more work to do. More people to protect, more corruption to root out. The mission had been successful, but the true victory would come when every last thread of the criminal network was unraveled. He glanced over at Rita, who was sitting quietly beside him. She had been through so much, and now she was safe, physically at least. Her eyes met his, full of gratitude. She had been silent for most of the ride back to town, lost in her thoughts, but the biker knew she was processing everything that had happened. "Thank you," Rita said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved us." The biker nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "It's what we do." His voice was steady, but beneath the calm, a storm still churned. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the syndicate's reach was still too wide. "This isn't over yet," the biker said, more to himself than to anyone else. Rita looked up at him, sensing the tension in his voice. "What do you mean?" The biker paused for a moment, his thoughts gathering. "The syndicate may be down, but there are still people out there, people who benefit from this chaos. We can't just walk away and pretend everything's fine." He turned to the rest of the crew, his expression hardening. "We've got to make sure this never happens again. We go after the people who helped cover it all up. We don't let them slip away." Storm, always the pragmatic one, nodded. "We've got leads. We can hit the remaining operations, flush out anyone who's still hiding." The biker's gaze shifted to Phantom. "What about the information we found? Any names we can move on?" Phantom flipped through a stack of papers, his eyes scanning quickly. "I've already contacted a few people. We've got some inside sources. The financials we found are already being traced. We'll find out where the money's going, and we'll follow it." The biker nodded, his mind working fast. "Let's get to it. We move in the next 24 hours. No hesitation." He looked at Rita, his tone softening just slightly. "You'll be safe. We won't stop until this is over." Rita nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. "I know, but I still don't understand how it got this far. How did it all happen?" The biker exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. "It's a long story, one that's been in the making for years. Corruption, power, and people thinking they can control the lives of others for their own gain. But now we're ending it. We're going to make sure no one else has to suffer." He paused, his voice taking on a more determined edge. "The people who did this need to be brought to justice. Not just Donovan, not just the lowlifes. Everyone who turned a blind eye needs to face what they've done." Crow, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "We've got connections. We've got the backing to take this higher. But it's going to take time. And we'll need to be smart." "I know," the biker replied. "We can't rush this. We've got to be strategic. But we also can't let this drag on. Every day we wait, it's another day someone else could fall through the cracks." He turned back to Rita. "We're going to make sure this stops with us. You and Lena won't have to worry about anyone like them again." Rita's eyes welled up, the weight of his words settling in. "I can't thank you enough," she whispered. "But I'm scared. I'm scared they'll come after us again." The biker knelt down in front of her, his gaze steady. "No one's coming for you again. Not while we're here." He stood, turning back to the crew. "All right, we've got our work cut out for us. We've got to make this right. We move fast, but we move smart. Stay sharp, stay focused. Let's finish this." The crew nodded in unison, their determination clear. The biker knew the road ahead would be dangerous, and that the syndicate's influence didn't end with Donovan. There were still shadows lurking, still enemies to be exposed, and as much as he wanted to believe they had won, he knew they were just getting started. But with his crew by his side, and with Rita and Lena safe for now, he knew they had a chance. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The bikers' eyes scanned the city streets as they passed by, the convoy of motorcycles cutting through the air with their engines roaring. The crew was moving in unison, focused and sharp. They had just wrapped up the last part of their operation, and now they were on the move again. The biker knew they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. The law was closing in, and they needed to keep the pressure on. He looked over at Rita, who was riding alongside him, her face tense with both relief and worry. She had been through so much, but the biker could see that she was trying to hold herself together. He reached out and gave her a nod, a silent assurance that everything was going to be okay. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. They had struck a major blow to the syndicate, but the truth was, they still didn't know how deep the corruption ran. The closer they got to the heart of the operation, the more dangerous it became. He had learned that much the hard way. They had already taken down Donovan and the lower-level criminals, but the real players were still out there, hiding in the shadows. And he had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. As they approached the outskirts of town, the biker's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, seeing a message from Storm. "They're moving. We've got a window, but it's closing fast." The biker's jaw tightened. They had to move quickly. He signaled to the crew, and the group made a sharp turn onto a quieter road that led toward the industrial district. It was the perfect place for an ambush, isolated, easy to hide in, and close enough to where they needed to be. They parked their bikes at the edge of the lot, just out of sight. The area was deserted, no sign of life except for the distant hum of the city. The biker took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was about to happen. "We hit hard. We hit fast," he said to the crew, his voice low but full of conviction. No hesitation. No second chances. They nodded in agreement, the tension in the air palpable. They all knew what was at stake. As they moved into position, the biker's mind raced. This was it. They had the information, they had the muscle, and now, they just needed to execute. The group fanned out, each member taking their spot, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the thick concrete walls of the building. The biker's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the main entrance. He checked his gun, making sure it was locked and loaded. This was a high-risk operation, but they didn't have time to be cautious. They had to take down the remaining leaders of the syndicate before they could regroup. The biker pressed a hand to the door, gently pushing it open. The cold air inside hit him, and he could smell the faint trace of smoke. It was quiet, too quiet. He motioned to Storm, who was behind him, and they moved in together. The lights flickered above them as they made their way through the dark hallway. It wasn't until they reached the end of the hall that they saw movement. Figures, shadows shifting in the dark. The biker's hand went to his sidearm, his senses sharpening. But just as quickly, the figures revealed themselves to be nothing more than the remnants of the syndicate's operation. A few guards, packing up what they could. The biker's grip on his weapon relaxed, but his mind was still on high alert. "We need to get to the vault," the biker said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's where they're keeping the real information." The crew moved quickly, each step bringing them closer to their goal. The biker's thoughts drifted to Rita again. They had come so far, but there was no time to dwell. Not yet. As they reached the vault, the crew spread out to secure the area. Storm moved to the controls, his fingers working quickly. "It's locked down tight," Storm said, frustration in his voice. "But we can crack it. Give me a minute." The biker nodded, keeping his eyes on the surroundings. They had no idea how many more people were inside the building. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from behind them. A shot fired. The biker spun around, his heart racing. But it wasn't what he expected. The noise came from a group of men, armed and ready. The biker's mind went into overdrive. They had been compromised. The fight was on. He dove behind cover, signaling for the rest of the crew to take positions. Gunfire erupted in the hallway, and the tension in the air was suffocating. "Take them down," the biker shouted. "Get to the vault." The crew fired back, taking out the guards one by one. The biker moved forward, his mind on the mission. There was no turning back now. The vault. had to be opened. Storm worked furiously, his hands shaking as he bypassed the final lock. And then, with a sharp click, the door to the vault opened. The biker breathed a sigh of relief. They had what they needed. But just as quickly, that relief was replaced with the reality of the situation. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. They had the evidence. Now they just had to get out before the real danger found them. The biker's eyes narrowed as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. His grip tightened on his weapon as the crew held their ground, the tension in the air palpable. The vault was open, the evidence they had been seeking now in their hands. But the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The crew had made it this far, but escaping with their lives, and the critical intel they had uncovered, was far from guaranteed. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hallways, and the biker could hear his heart pounding in his chest. They had been compromised. Whoever was left inside the building was coming after them. The crew moved quickly, covering each other as they advanced toward the exit. The biker signaled to Storm, his eyes locking with his right-hand man's. They needed to move. Fast. Storm nodded, signaling to the others to fall back. They were nearly there. The biker moved forward, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. They had exposed a criminal network that had been thriving in the shadows for years, but now it was time to disappear before the full force of that network turned on them. As they reached the door to the outside, the biker's thoughts flashed to Rita and Lena. They had come so far to protect them. They couldn't afford to fail now. They couldn't let the criminals escape, but they couldn't risk staying too long, either. The crew needed to get out with the evidence, and fast. The first member of the crew reached the door and threw it open, a rush of cold air hitting their faces. The biker followed closely, his senses on high alert. They made it outside, but the danger was far from over. Across the street, a black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking their only exit. More gunmen spilled out, weapons raised. The biker cursed under his breath. There was no time to waste. He reached for his radio, speaking quickly. "We've been cornered. Move out, we'll take them down." The crew immediately spread out, taking cover behind nearby cars and dumpsters. Gunfire erupted from the SUV, but the bikers were already responding, returning fire with precision. The biker's heart raced, his pulse quickening with every shot that rang out. The fight was on. They had no choice but to fight their way through. The biker and Storm moved together, their movements synchronized, covering each other as they advanced toward the SUV. The sound of bullets whizzing past them only fueled their determination. They had to get the evidence to safety. They had to get out of there. The bikers advanced, taking out the enemy one by one, until they were just feet away from the SUV. The driver, a large man in a black suit, was trying to climb back into the vehicle, but the biker wasn't about to let him escape. With a swift motion, the biker pulled his gun and took the man down, the sound of the shot reverberating in the empty street. The rest of the crew quickly subdued the remaining gunmen, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any other threats. The fight was over, but the tension in the air still lingered. The biker wiped the sweat from his forehead, his breath coming in heavy gasps. They had done it. They had taken down the last of the syndicate's forces, and they had the evidence they needed to expose the full scope of the operation. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. As the crew gathered around, the biker looked at them, his expression hardening. "We're not done yet. We still need to get this intel to the authorities. We can't afford to let them hide any longer. We can't let them get away." He turned to Storm. "Get in touch with the right people. We need them to act fast. We've got the proof. It's time to make sure this all comes to an end." Storm nodded, his face set in determination. "I'll take care of it. We'll make sure this is all exposed. No one's getting away." The biker looked over at Rita, who was standing at a distance, her face pale but relieved. Lena was with her, safe for the moment. The biker's heart softened as he looked at them. "We did this for you," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Rita gave him a small, grateful smile. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You've given us a chance to live again." The biker's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned to the crew. "We've done what we set out to do. But this isn't over. Not until every last one of them is behind bars." The crew nodded in unison, their resolve unwavering. They had taken down the criminal empire, exposed the truth, and made sure that Lena and Rita were safe. But there was still work to be done. And they weren't going to stop until every single person responsible for the pain and suffering was held accountable. As the crew mounted their bikes and prepared to leave, the bikers' mind raced. They had won this battle, but the war wasn't over yet. There were still people out there who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But the biker knew one thing for certain. They wouldn't stop until the job was done. And this time, they would make sure the truth would finally see the light of day. The biker sat back in his chair, the weight of everything that had happened settling in. He had expected the aftermath to feel different, maybe lighter, more triumphant, but instead, it felt heavy, like the calm before another storm. They had done it. They had taken down the syndicate, exposed their operations, and protected Rita and Lena. But the biker knew it wasn't over. Not yet. They had made it through the battle, but now came the hardest part, keeping the truth alive and making sure those responsible never had the chance to hurt anyone again. He looked around at the crew, the family he'd built over the years. They were gathered in the safe house, going over the details of what had just happened. Everyone was on edge. The tension in the room was palpable, but they all knew there was still work to be done. The biker turned to Storm, who had just come back from a quick call with their contacts in the police. "What's the latest?" the biker asked. Storm's face was grim. "The authorities are starting to take action, but we're not out of the woods yet. There are still people protecting the syndicate, and they're trying to cover their tracks. It's going to take time for the real players to be brought down." The biker nodded, his jaw tightening. "We've got to keep pushing. We can't let up now. Not after everything we've exposed." Storm gave him a look of understanding. "I know, but we need to be careful. We've made a lot of enemies along the way, and we can't afford to underestimate them." The biker looked at Rita, who had been sitting silently across the room. Her eyes were filled with gratitude, but there was still fear there. He could see it in the way her hands shook slightly as she picked up her coffee cup. He walked over to her, kneeling down beside her. "You're safe now," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've got your back, and we're not stopping until it's all over." Rita looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You've given us a chance at a new life. I never thought I'd get out of that hell." The biker smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't need to thank me. It's what we do. We protect our own." He stood and turned back to the crew. "But the job isn't finished. There are still pieces of this puzzle left to put together. We can't afford to leave anyone behind." The crew nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. The biker's gaze lingered on Rita for a moment longer before he turned and moved toward the door. "I'll be back soon," he said to the crew. "I need to make sure everything's in motion. We'll be ready for whatever comes next." As he walked out into the cool evening air, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. They had a plan. They had the evidence. They had the truth. And they weren't going to let anyone bury it. The biker knew that the fight was far from over. The syndicate may have been dismantled, but the people behind it were still out there, still trying to cover their tracks. But this time, they wouldn't get away. He had seen the depths of the corruption, and he wasn't going to rest until every last piece of it was brought to light. He revved the engine of his bike, the sound of it filling the quiet night as he rode off into the distance. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. No matter how dark it got, he would never stop fighting for what was right. He would never stop protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He would never stop until the fight was over. The biker sat quietly in the garage, the roar of the engine fading into the background as he processed everything that had happened. The mission had been a success. They had dismantled the syndicate, exposed the corruption, and ensured that Rita and Lena were safe. But the work wasn't over. The adrenaline that had fueled their actions for days now gave way to a heavy silence. It was as if the weight of what they had done, of what they had uncovered, was finally settling on his shoulders. He looked around at the crew, each one of them weary but resolute. They had fought for something bigger than themselves, and they had won. But there was still the question of the future. What happened next? The biker stood up, pacing the garage as his thoughts raced. He couldn't stop thinking about the look in Rita's eyes when they first met, how grateful she was for their help. But he also saw the fear, the same fear that Lena carried. Fear that they would never be free. The biker had promised them safety, but that promise was always easier said than done. He turned to Storm, who was still working on his bike, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What's the word on the investigation?" the biker asked. Storm glanced up, his expression unreadable. The cops are moving forward with it. They're pressing charges against the remaining members of the syndicate. But there's still a lot of work to do. Some of them are still out there, hiding in plain sight. And they're not going down without a fight. The biker nodded. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Storm made it all feel real. We can't stop now, the biker said, his voice steady. We need to stay on them. Make sure every last one of them is brought down. Storm stood up, tossing a rag to the side. We'll keep pushing. We've got people working on it. We won't let them get away. The biker looked around at the crew, his eyes scanning each face. They had all been through hell together, and now it was time to make sure that none of it had been in vain. Everyone's earned a rest, he said, his tone softening just a bit. But we need to stay vigilant. We can't let our guard down, not yet. The crew nodded in agreement, each one of them understanding the gravity of what was still to come. The biker turned back to Rita, who was sitting in the corner, a quiet presence amidst the chaos. He walked over to her, sitting beside her for a moment of silence. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but full of gratitude. You did it, she said softly. You saved us. He nodded, his gaze steady. We're not done yet, but we'll keep fighting for you. For Lena. For everyone who's been hurt by this. Rita smiled, her relief finally shining through the weight she had been carrying. I don't know what we would have done without you, she whispered. The biker looked out at the rest of the crew, each one of them ready for whatever came next. You don't have to worry about that, he said. We're family, and family always has each other's backs. Just then, the sound of motorcycles revving filled the air. The crew was gearing up for the next phase of their mission. The biker stood up, walking toward his bike. Let's get to work, he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. As the crew mounted their bikes and roared to life, the biker's mind raced with thoughts of the road ahead. They had done what they came here to do, but the fight was far from over. They had made enemies along the way. Powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But the biker wasn't afraid. He had seen the darkest corners of the world, and he knew that as long as they stood together, they could take on anything. They were a family now, bound together by the same mission, the same goal, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And they weren't going to stop until every last piece of the syndicate was brought to justice. As the convoy of motorcycles sped off into the horizon, the biker felt a surge of determination. They had fought for something greater than themselves, and now they were going to finish it. They would bring the truth to light. They would make sure that no one, not even the most powerful criminals, could hide behind lies and fear. And in the end, they would win. Because they always did.